All right, so good morning, everyone. This is Michelle Landsberg, Director of Advanced Thief River, and welcome to the Wednesday webinar. Today, we've got a great session, and I'm not going to introduce that. I'll let Laura do that, but these, as you know, are jointly hosted by Advanced Thief River, the Thief River Falls Chamber of Commerce, and Visit Thief River Falls. So we're glad you could join us today, and I'm going to hand it off to Laura to introduce our presenter.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm Laura Stengrim. I'm the Executive Director for Visit Thief River Falls, which is our Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I am pleased to be introducing Bruce today. Bruce Nustad joined the Minnesota Retailers Association as its staff president in September 2012, bringing him a strong background of working with the business community. Before joining the retailers, he served as TwinWest Chamber of Commerce president and CEO. Nustad's experience also includes leadership positions with the Minnesota High Tech Association, American Collectors Association, Twin Cities North Chamber of Commerce, and the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce. Bruce's claim to fame is as an extras role in the movie Fargo, which I'm very intrigued about. So take it away, Bruce. We're excited to hear from you today.
Great. Well, hey, good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it. Hopefully the sun will shine at some point today. We'll see. And the rains will subside a little bit. But despite those things, today's sort of a big day, June 10th. We get to see the opening of restaurants to indoor customers, and hopefully everybody's favorite gym and fitness center is reopening too, and we can all get back in shape a little bit. So it's kind of a big day from a turn the dial perspective here in Minnesota, and I'm just happy to be with you to chat a little bit about kind of consumer behavior during COVID, and maybe even looking a little bit beyond out into the future a little bit. And I just want to thank the three organizations for inviting me today. If you have questions, or I say something that you want me to reframe for your industry throughout the presentation today, feel free to just hop in and say that, or use the chat feature in Zoom as well. I'd love to cover your questions. In fact, we'll reserve some time at the end just for some conversation, because quite frankly, this is the great way for me to learn what's going on specific to your community as well. I guess I won't get into it too much yet. I'll share my screen in a moment, but we actually know one of the odd things about COVID-19 is each community is sort of processing and reacting differently. So I'm going to try to share today just some consumer trends at a little bit more of a macro and Minnesota level. Hopefully some of those I can customize a little bit for your area. But feel free to ask about that as we go through things as well today. So as Laura mentioned, I work for the Minnesota Retailers Association. We're just a collection of about 1,200 storefronts across the state. About a third of our members are what you'd probably consider Main Street type retailers, or about a third are regional retailers. I call them that because I don't know what else to call them. But like a Thrifty White Pharmacy, I think of as a regional retailer. And then about a third are national brands. So one of the interesting things about our association model here is we get a nice perspective of sort of the different sizes and, quite frankly, geographies of retailers. So I'll try to weave that into the presentation today too, relative to what we're hearing. But I just want to, again, thank the three organizations. I know you're all doing amazing work. I know you've done these webinars since early April. That's a lot of content. That's a lot of help for the business community. Antonio, I know you're doing great work there at the chamber. I get to see a little bit more firsthand what some of the chambers are doing, especially during this COVID time period. So just thank you all for everything you're doing, and for the businesses out there. Thanks for hanging in there and doing what you can, and adapting as fast as you can, and making changes and trying to make things work. I hope today we can give you a little information that helps kind of center things from a consumer perspective. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. All right. Do you see just the consumer behavior screen, or do you see anything else? All good. Okay, great. So I'm going to try to share just a little bit on what's going on with consumer behaviors right now. And in specific, try to focus just a little bit on these questions, which will hopefully pop up for you here. Sorry. There we go. And those questions really are people returning to stores? I think that's the biggest question that we get asked here at the association. Are shoppers coming back? What can we expect there? What are consumers really thinking about today, and how are they processing the environment? A lot of the questions we get here at the association surround what are people buying? And I think that's a great question as you think about what you're going to be selling and how you might change your offerings. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of what's the trajectory for Minnesota? Where do we think things are going? When do things loosen up a little bit more from a consumer spending perspective? And then we'll end with just some suggestions on things we think you should be thinking about as you kind of process all these different and various things. So on that first question of are people returning to the stores? So you have probably seen this graphic. This is actually the governor's graphic that every time he gets up for a press conference talking about things, he says, well, I'm making my decisions based on public health, social distancing, and well-being. You've probably seen this a million times. And I like to use it because I'm assuming the state of Minnesota probably paid some consultants some really good money for this graphic to help them understand what's going on. So I like to modify it for the conversation that we're having. So I think you can sort of take this paradigm or model that the governor has put together, and you can cross out the factors for loosening, and you can insert the factors that lead to consumer spending. So I think you can kind of modify this. And in place of public health, we like to slide in the perception of health risk, which is essentially the same thing. But maybe the little difference there is how are people processing the risk that they take interacting within the environment? How do workers process it? Those types of things. I think you can cross out social distancing, which is a key component, and really just relabel that your COVID-19 plan. And that's what is your business doing to provide a safe environment for your workers and your consumers. And then I think you can take well-being, and that's probably the biggest modification, and really relabel that product or products and impulse. And so today what we'll talk about mostly focusing in on are these two items: your COVID-19 plan and how you can kind of adapt that based on what consumers are expecting, and then the product and impulse part of it relative to what you can do to motivate customers to return to your store or your business or your agency, your social service agency. So again, I think you can kind of take this model that's been put together, and in the middle there where there's the state of Minnesota, and that's usually where the governor says that's where good decisions are being made based on public health, social distancing, and societal well-being. I think you can redraft that and say that's actually where purchases are happening. And that's when people perceive health risk to be low, they're confident in your COVID-19 plan, and you're offering the right products with the right incentive for people to shop. That's where the magic is happening. So just really quickly, I think on the question of are people returning to stores, and there are parts of the presentation, I've got some survey data that will interest you. This really here is more kind of anecdotal what we're seeing. And I think overall, the answer to the question, are people returning to stores, is generally yes. But as you'll see here, it's happening fairly slowly. And I would be interested in your observations relative to the community and your surrounding communities, if you're seeing that same type of thing. I think of back to retail. So we've worked obviously a lot in the retail sector. I think of when we got curbside open, we saw a little bit of an uptick. When we got stores open at 50%, May 18th, which feels like forever ago, but really wasn't that long ago. We saw statewide about 60% of stores actually reopen on that 18th. Now we're just about up to 100% now, but we saw a little bit of a slower store reopening. And I think in tune, we saw a little bit of a slower return of the customer. What we've seen is loyal customers step back in stores, but I think we're not seeing a lot of shopping experience going on right now, meaning if I've never been to a store, this might not be my moment to try it, to try out that store, to go to that store. But we see a lot of like returning of very loyal customers. So curious if that's what you're seeing as well. I think we are seeing some smaller transactions. We're seeing people come to stores or visit their favorite small business to buy very specific things that either they have been missing or they kind of had on a mental list of, I can't wait to get to Jane's store to make a purchase because I want to support that business. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a smaller transaction base right now, but I think that will improve, especially as the weather gets a little bit better. But that is one of our anecdotal observations. You're seeing people come to a store and buy one or two things, not 4 or 5 things, especially in like a boutique type setting. Thirdly, you'll see there, I think I mentioned this earlier, there's a pretty strong reliance, and I think this is across the state, on shopping or patronizing small businesses in places that they previously trusted, again, versus call it an unknown storefront. So you're seeing that sort of trust factor really, really play out. And again, it tends to kind of all tie together. It's a loyal customer that wants to go to a store that they've been to 100 times. They maybe even know the owner or a key employee, et cetera. And we certainly haven't seen a return to pre-COVID level of visitors in stores or at small businesses, which I guess that probably doesn't feel like it's a really big statement to you. Probably would have woken up this morning and guessed that, but we're certainly not quite seeing pre-COVID levels, comparable traffic to what you would have had last year at this time. But the other big yes, I think that really works for us here in Minnesota is tourism and weather. And, in essence, we've all been sort of bunkered down a little bit since March, and we're eager to get out. And that pushes the consumer to get out and do a little bit more spending and get out on a Saturday morning and walk downtown, et cetera. So we are seeing some of the natural kind of pieces to Minnesota playing to our advantage relative to people returning to stores. So I guess overall, again, anecdotally love to hear what you see, but I think we're seeing people come back, but just not nearly at the levels, one that you would have at a comparable period last year. All right, give me just 1 second here. Great. So let's dive into, and I actually can't see the chat function right now, Michelle or Laura or Antonio. So if you guys see anything in the chat section, feel free to mention it. But so let's walk into a little bit of what consumers are expecting. I think the long-term consumer mindset, I should say, the consumer mindset is that there will be a long-term impact. I think we're seeing some changes in routine, and I'm not sure if you have noticed this in your household, but in my household, I've noticed we attempt to go to the grocery store once every 2 weeks instead of once every 4 days. I mean, my anecdotal thing is like, we always thought we were weekly shoppers for our essentials, but the reality is a lot of families think they're weekly shoppers, but they make it about 4 or 5 days, or they make a trip in between their weekly piece. Now it seems like the consumer is sort of gearing a little bit toward a mentality where they're going to visit the store less frequently. I don't know that that's actually playing out, but I'm just mentioning that that is the consumer mentality. The Nustad family feels like they're going to try to go to the grocery store once every 2 weeks. Now, rarely do we meet that, but it does impact what we buy then in each of those trips. We're definitely seeing an impact too, just on dollars, personal finances, and uncertainty around personal finances. Now, we can break apart the economy a little bit, and one could argue there is a section of the economy and worker that has not actually felt a strong impact. They've continued to get paid. They maybe even got their stimulus dollars. They got their tax refund. Those folks, their shopping habits are a little different, but there's a good half of our economy that feels a strong sense of uncertainty relative to their next paycheck, even as things start to settle down a little bit right now. And I think we have to really recognize that that is making a dramatic impact on shopping decisions. And again, I know I just used a 50-50. It may be a little bit more like 60% where there's some strong uncertainty, but there's definitely a segment of the economy and a segment of the consumer that feels a lot of uncertainty right now, and that is impacting purchases. Also, kind of in the consumer expectation category, and we'll come back to this later, this might be a key point in today's presentation. It's just labeled different store experience, but consumers are expecting a different store experience. And that doesn't matter which part of Minnesota you're in. You could be in a part of Minnesota that has very few COVID-19 cases, and you've already been conditionalized to expect a different store experience. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I think that's really important for people to just realize in their interactions with people. It's a great time because now's the time you can change things as well and, kind of change it within the COVID context. But, and then lastly on the screen, consumers actually expect inconvenience today. Whereas again, the Nustad family would expect to get gas and have that trip take 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I actually think that's like the average amount of time somebody spends at a convenience store, 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Your expectation is that that's actually longer now, again, based on COVID protections and things like that. So keep in mind that consumers are kind of processing their shopping in business environments a little different as well. A few more items just in the consumer category. We are seeing, and I'll shift to some statistics in just a minute, but we are seeing some changes in, switching over to essential purchasing. That probably doesn't surprise anybody. I mean, essentially we had, in theory, businesses open that were just selling essential merchandise for a while. So you're going to see some more spending in that category. But I think it does, for most stores, maybe take a pause to take a look at what you're selling, what your products are, and how they fit into that. But again, in a minute, we'll get into a little deeper some of those household goods and things like that consumers are interested in. But we're seeing spending changes to more essentials. We're definitely seeing shifts to household items. Again, that probably doesn't surprise too many people. I'm just looking at the backgrounds in most of the Zooms. Most of you look like you are in your home, and innately when you are in your home, you look around. In fact, if you look at the wall behind me, that was painted about a week and a half ago because I've been sitting in this basement bedroom that had been the same color since probably 1984. And eventually I went out and bought a couple gallons of paint and painted my wall. I mean, you were just seeing more shifts like that based on how people are looking at their environment around them. Thirdly, there, probably no surprise, less travel. I mean, the airlines will tell you that. And I think that is a shift we're going to see pretty solid for the next year and a half, maybe even 2 years. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute as well. Seeing big impacts on gas. If you've got any friends that own convenience stores, they're selling a lot less gas at a lower price. Hopefully the margin's the same, but they're selling a lot less gas. And certainly this period, especially March through today, and probably actually for the next 6 months, we're seeing a pretty dramatic impact on restaurants and bars, et cetera. And then again, just overall changes in purchases. And part of this is patterns, again, back to my comment on routines. But part of it is just a general, again, when you look at maybe that's 60% of the economy that has less certainty in their paycheck, there's just a general change in their purchasing patterns and purchasing habits. And then just a couple more slides on kind of this consumer expectation part. This one is the question we get a lot. Usually it's from media though. Media love to know if people are purchasing online or embracing that even more. I'll be honest, I generally say to every member of the media that asks me about that, the kind of unfair nature of our sales tax system for so many years and the advent of e-commerce really made significant changes in online and digital. Now, certainly COVID has had some impact too, but I mean, a lot of retailers, even the smallest of small retailers, generally you'll see a website which lists some type of product offering, a way to contact the store, et cetera. So while we have seen some changes, I'm not sure they've been amazingly dramatic like kind of the media would like to hear, but there are definitely some changes in online and digital. Statistically, subscriptions are up. So that probably doesn't surprise you too much. I think when I say subscriptions, a lot of people think of like Netflix. But what you want to think of is some of the other services that you might use as well. So I think of like kind of the Weight Watchers type services. But generally subscription type services are up, but that is because a lot of those are very home oriented, and we've taken a pause and done things like installed smart thermostats and subscribed to the Energy Smart service related to that, those types of things. So we're seeing a pretty good jump in subscriptions. We're seeing some generational changes. This is maybe the biggest area of COVID. So I like to use my mother-in-law as an example. She is in Lake City, Minnesota, and I'm not sure that prior to this, she had ever trusted putting a credit card into an online system from a retail perspective. But I actually know she's buying a lot from Kohl's online now. So I actually think we're seeing sort of some generational changes relative to maybe where there were some concerns. In my mother-in-law's case, and I should be sensitive because I know you're recording this. I know she, did a little analysis, and she said, you know what, my risk of having my credit card stolen is less than my risk of going to a store and picking up something that she doesn't want to get. So I think we are seeing some generational changes. Certainly seeing curbside. I think curbside's, if you weren't doing curbside prior to COVID, I think it's a good idea to continue to try to offer that service. I think we think of curbside as sometimes this complicated e-commerce transaction. I will say the most successful retailers I have seen implement curbside in short order, walk around their store with Facebook Live going, record that, put that on their Facebook page, and tell customers to call if they want, to get the cutout Minnesota cribbage board, and call me at the store when you get here and I'll walk it out to your car. So I think curbside is here to stay in a lot of situations. And now we always encourage retailers not to overcomplicate curbside, really just think of it more of as an extension of what you're doing already and how you're connecting with customers. And then I do think there is a consumer shift. There is an expectation of online options. And again, we know that not everybody wants to spend $5,000 on an e-commerce website. By the way, if you can do that and support a local service provider, do it. It's a great investment. But also think about, again, just take a look at your website. Make sure you're listing the brands that you sell, examples of pictures. Even if you don't allow a transaction online, it's really great for a consumer to get an idea of what you sell. And make sure your phone number is really accessible on your webpage. It's probably my one biggest criticism of retail websites. We hide the phone number because we think people don't want to call because they're looking online. And in reality, what they actually want to do is they want to pick up the phone and they want to say, hey, do you have Melissa and Doug puzzles? I'm looking for the tractor with the fishing rod. And a lot of times we don't make it that easy for consumers, but we really have to embrace those types of changes. And those are kind of, again, the fundamental shifts in what a consumer expects from an online option perspective. And then meetings and events, I probably won't go too far into. I mean, the fact that we're doing this via Zoom is a good testament. We're going to see online platforms like Zoom here to stay for a while. One, I think we've learned they're convenient. But two, I think we have learned that where we thought maybe, especially I think of this in the association world, I thought a certain number of my members would never attend an online meeting, so they would only attend in-person meetings, and I'm close enough that they should be able to come. I think we're going to see a little bit of a fundamental change in kind of how people think about meetings and events. And quite frankly, many retailers are dependent on, or at least in some ways touched by, meetings and events. So think of folks that walk into the store and say, my daughter's getting married next week, or we've got a family photo, et cetera. I think we're just going to see some different changes directly in retail due to changes in meetings and events. And then just a quick note here. I can't remember what pundit, somebody likes to use this homebody economy shift. I think the homebody economy shift is kind of short term. I mentioned it earlier relative to planning cycles. But I think we had some expectation, I think, in April that maybe this homebody economy, things that were focused on home purchases, was going to be the way things looked for the next year. I actually am a little bit more optimistic. I think the consumer mentality is going to shift this summer. Again, I credit Minnesota tourism, and even though we might not see as many outdoor festivals, we're going to see people still desiring to have that outdoor activity. So I think this idea that there's a homebody economy is still relevant right now, probably relevant for the next month or two, but I think we'll shift a little bit away from people kind of, again, looking around and making their purchases based on what's around them versus thinking outside their home and the experiences that they might want to have. I did put a note on here. I think people early on thought malls would maybe never return. Actually, when we look at malls, they are the epitome of space. and flow control. So I think, while malls have a short-term impact, I think malls are going to be just fine. I think the Newstead family will not be too concerned about taking their family to a mall to do some shopping, knowing that the malls are conscientious about COVID as well. And then I mentioned youth sports because if you own a sports store, there's this pent-up demand for youth sports. So I think youth sports equipment, although it's not in the next couple of my slides, that's an area where we're going to see a lot of sales, especially even in the apparel area. And as people try to support local teams and national teams, et cetera. Okay. Before we shift topics, just wanted to cover kind of these 4 really quick things. Again, kind of at a high level, the consumer is going to expect that things are different. And along with that, they're going to want to make sure there's some reassurances. So this is where I make a big pitch for, I know sometimes they feel tacky signs on the door of retail shops, but people are expecting before they walk in to know what's your policy on face masks, what's your policy on social distancing, how do I know if the store is too crowded, those types of things. So those are actually reassuring to customers. Sometimes for us, I think they feel like over communication, but those things are really reassuring to customers. We're going to see interesting medical endorsements. I like to use Brainerd as just a quick example. I think as businesses put their COVID-19 plans together, Brainerd worked with the county there to say, hey, we want you to look at all these plans. So that's not necessarily a product endorsement, but it's sort of an endorsement of how you're operating in a safe manner. So that's kind of interesting. Consumers are going to expect to see, again, visible safety precautions in place, lots of signage. I joked early on that blue painter's tape would be a retailer and small business's best friend. You know, sometimes you don't have time to get a sign made up for your floor on social distancing. So honestly, blue painter's tape and things like that, the consumer's been conditioned to understand what an X on the floor means already. Again, those visible safety precautions are really important, as well as sort of the emphasis on cleaning. Okay, so real quickly, what are we buying? Here's your statistical research for today. There's a group called Resonate, and they did some research relative to sort of what is the consumer thinking about. And I think this is interesting. I think 1 in 4, and I think this plays out here in Minnesota too, 1 in 4 Minnesotans probably don't intend at this point to dine in a restaurant through the end of the year. Now that research is, I can't remember, 4 or 5 weeks old. So that may have changed a little bit here, but I think the notion is still good. If I owned a restaurant, I would be thinking of my market a little different. And I would be cognizant of the fact that, you know, maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Minnesotans just aren't going to feel comfortable returning to a restaurant. I'm not sure that the statistics bear out for that level of discomfort, by the way, but I think it's important to know. And then about 50% of folks don't expect a leisure travel. So I think that impacts things a little bit too, relative to when you think about what's the positioning of your business, what type of products are you offering, et cetera. But about 1 in 2 folks don't expect to leisure travel. That's different from business travel, but 1 in 2 folks don't expect to leisure travel. So I think that impacts kind of what you sell and what your offerings look like. Here is sort of, I got 2 screens for you. This is the one that I think is statistically interesting. There's an organization called Viabil. They did some research, and they are finding, interestingly enough, fashion sales up 106%. So that bodes well for our Main Street boutiques, by the way. I think we're just on the beginning of that as well. I mean, if you think about it, Bruce Nustad's been wearing the same 5 shirts for his Zoom calls since March. He could probably use a couple new shirts. You know, so I think we're going to see sort of some increase continue in that area. Probably no surprise, a 50% increase in computers and accessories. Just yesterday, I got a picture from a buddy who showed me his new home office setup. Now, I don't know why it took him 3 months to get that done, but I think we're going to see actually, you know, a little bit of continuance of that. Although I think a lot of consumers have made a lot of those investments in the computer side. So now we'll continue to see, you know, the accessory side of it kick in. I mentioned kind of subscriptions. A lot of the subscriptions that have seen a boost in this buying cycle are actually in the health and wellness area. So programs like Nike's that they've offered for free will now turn to a paid service. Consumers have enjoyed those products, and we'll start to see revenues flow in there, but we've already seen a nice boost in health and wellness. And then home and garden has seen an almost 20% increase. That probably doesn't surprise you either. And home garden and nursery got opened up pretty early in the process here too, so that helped out. So let's just run a quick translation of that into what folks are buying in Minnesota. And this is all anecdotal, but from conversations with retailers across the state, these are the 5 things that continue to come up. Now, the first one there, again, I'll have you process that through that people are sitting around their homes, realizing they're not going to take their trip to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and deciding they can buy that, $1,500 couch that they've always wanted. So we're seeing a lot of those purchases where consumers are shifting travel into spending, and that's playing out in furniture. Some of the biggest furniture winners, I think, are actually in greater Minnesota right now. I've got a good friend who owns a store down in southeastern Minnesota, and he's just had a really great amount of success with folks relative to furniture sales. So I think we're going to continue to see that. Bikes, I don't know if anybody has tried to purchase a bike in the last 2 months. That is nearly impossible. Let me rephrase it. High-end bikes, you can find a $2,000 and $3,000 bike right now. It's a little bit more difficult to find a $500-$600 bike. So bikes have been really, really popular. Landscaping, as I mentioned earlier, I put nursery in with that, garden goods. I think we're going to see hopefully some statistics out in a few weeks. I'm guessing we're going to see a record number of trees planted across Minnesota during this time period of the last 4 or 5 weeks. Home goods, like I mentioned, are selling really, really strong. And those would include sort of knick-knacky type things as well, impulse purchases for the home. And then certainly, probably no surprise to anybody, food for home preparation is big right now. I bet actually if you opened your cabinet next to your stove, I bet you've got 3 or 4 spices in there that you never had before, that you decided to try out because you saw some recipe online. So we're just seeing a nice little bump in these 5 areas. I think specifically in Minnesota, they probably play out a little bit more across the nation too, but I think we can definitely say we're seeing nice bumps in Minnesota. So I'm going to cover just a few quick things relative to Minnesota's trajectory. I think recovery is going to vary by region and really by community. I think that goes back to a comment I made earlier on, that we're going to see recovery looking different in each community. I actually think some of your smaller communities will recover a little faster, but I think that recovery will be a little gradual. I think if you look at your own community there, it's really hard right now to talk to a reporter or another retailer or a small business and get a sense for whether or not when recovery, full recovery might occur. A lot of retailers we talk to say, to knock down to that third bullet point, we're really not going to know what retail and small business looks like until after the holidays. And that's probably just a reality for a lot of retailers right now. Your cycle has been interrupted. Your summer sales cycle is interrupted. That creates some cash flow issues relative to buying inventory for the fall and the holidays. It's a little bit of a cycle type effect. And I think we're not really going to know what retail really, really looks like until after the holidays or deep into the holidays, which I know makes things really difficult for folks and adds a lot of uncertainty. I think the one thing we have to hold on to here in Minnesota, shopping has always been an experience. It's always been social. Now, what we're going to be missing probably are some of those community events that support shopping, but we encourage communities to try to figure out alternative ways of doing things. I know one of my family's favorite things to do is to hit a town on a Saturday where you see the Saturday activity of Main Street. And that might look a little different this year, but we really encourage communities to try to figure out still what that looks like. Downtowns are big areas where there's actually lots of space. And so maybe instead of having the car show in a compact area to drive traffic, maybe there's a different way of doing the car show throughout town and things like that. So again, shopping though is social, it's very experiential for Minnesotans. And I think, if we can figure out the summer how to continue some of those experiences in a safe way that people are comfortable with, we can sort of continue to get some of that traffic that retailers so desperately need. All right, a couple of quick things, and then let's open it up for questions. Our biggest advice, I think, is integrated into these full 4 points right here. And now is a great time to reevaluate your products, bring in some more products that match with what consumers are buying today, advertise those products. It's a great time to integrate your COVID-19 safety plan and your marketing plan. In fact, I really think all businesses and small businesses and retailers should be marketing their COVID plan right now and talking about what they're doing to ensure safety and how that works with their products. One of the key things consumers are really interested in is what has changed at your store. So even if you don't want to market your COVID plan, you can market a what's changed at our store type marketing plan, and I think that's very useful. And those all come out really in new communication plans. Now is a great time to recraft how you're talking to your customers. And again, back to my earlier point, it's a great time to think a little bit about what the holidays look like for you too. And are you going to be able to purchase the inventory that you want for the holidays? And are you talking to your banker and your business partners and those types of things to ensure you're positioned? I know it's a struggle today, but believe it or not, we got to be thinking about that holiday season already relative to our meeting, be ready for it and prepared for it. And what do we need to do today based on what we know to get ready? I'm going to skip these, except I just want to mention, and again, thanks to the chamber, early on, we put out kind of for retailers in specific, a plan to get us back to normal. In our plan, we're through our phase 3. That's a return to open stores on May 18th. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more capacity available in stores, but really what we're going to return to is this last bullet point. The reason I put it on here is, we got to get to a point where consumers have normal access to stores with big post-pandemic shifts, and that's from restaurants to retail, et cetera. But we got to be thinking about what that looks like and how that plays out and when it happens. And I know there's a lot of balance there. If you're looking for some additional resources on our website, we've got a COVID-19 page that has some resources for best practices, et cetera. And I think I just want to end with 2 really quick slides. Usually this is part of our presentation on how do you craft your COVID-19 preparedness plan, because what a lot of business owners struggle with is how do I craft my safety plan in a way that doesn't look like a CDC document? And I think we've got just a couple different ways you can do that. If in our mind, if you're thinking about not necessarily just your most loyal and returning customer, but actually the customer that's never been in your store, if you're sort of thinking about how does everything work in your store through the eyes of a customer who has never walked through the door, you're going to craft a really good plan. Same with employees. Think about what does my plan look like, not for returning and new employees, but for an employee that I would just hire. And you might not be thinking about hiring a new employee right now, but I think that's a great filter set relative to how you craft your plan. And then again, certainly think about what does it look like from a perception standpoint, what do regulators think of your plan, et cetera. But really, I think this exercise is what we find to be the most beneficial for retailers. If you haven't sort of recrafted your plan, or you did it real quick to get open and you want to do it again, what we recommend is you take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, you write the word contactless on the top of it. On the left-hand side, you write how you do business today, like how you will process a return. If somebody tries on a shirt, what do you do with that shirt? You write that on the left side, and then rewrite that on the right side on how you're going to do that in the most contactless perspective. So even for consumers that aren't worried about COVID, they never object to less contact. Are you touching their credit card? Those types of things. So again, I think you can kind of craft a new plan. And then once you get that on your piece of paper, you can decide how you're going to communicate that to consumers as well. All right, good. So that gets me through kind of my prepared slides there.